Hey, I'm Tamara Kandaker, and you're listening to the Decibel from the Globe and Mail. It's still hard to believe the Olympics are actually happening, but here we are. The opening ceremony is on Friday, and it is going to be a much more low-key affair than usual. Lots of empty seats, a smaller parade since a lot of athletes are flying in just in time for their competitions, and way less of the mass choreography and spectacle that we're used to. And the games in general are going to be really different. Earlier this month, Japan decided that there would be no spectators watching in person. The country's under a COVID-19 state of emergency, and the public's come out strongly against letting the Olympics continue in case they become a super spreader event. And of course, the other difference is that these Olympics are coming after 5 years instead of the usual 4, and in the midst of a pandemic that's presented some pretty unique challenges for training. Things have been particularly tough for Canadian swimmers who were locked out of pools for way longer than their competition. But the pressure is on for them to perform, especially the women's team, since they crushed it at the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. Grant Robertson was there in Rio, and he's been looking at how the women's team has been preparing for Tokyo and their new focus on using data to gain a competitive edge.
And so the coaches use data to show her, okay, you're slightly behind here, or if you could just, get your stroke rate up here or hone this part of your start, you could be that much better.
Grant is on the show today, and he's going to give us an inside look at how Swimming Canada is approaching these historic games. That's today on The Decibel. Grant, hi. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I don't know anything about swimming. You're going to have to bear with me.
Okay.
So for people who don't follow Canadian swimming, can you start by giving us just a quick primer on Canada's women's swim team and how they did in Rio?
They walked away with 6 medals in the pool, all from the women. And the women's team really shocked the world in Rio. 4 of those medals came from Penny Oleksiak, who at the time was a 16-year-old phenom who really came out of nowhere and, surprised everybody by not only swimming with the best swimmers in the world, but beating them. And that basically brought her from a little-known swimmer to most of Canada to being a superstar who still holds the record for the most medals won in a Summer Olympics. And another 16-year-old in Rio, a swimmer named Taylor Ruck, will be swimming on the relay team. And there's been not just 4 years between these two Olympics, but 5 now. So they're now, 5 years older, 20, 21 years old now. And as their coach points out, they've grown from being teenagers to adults, gotten a lot stronger. They've been through a lot over the past 5 years. So they're going to be, in many ways, different swimmers in the pool, potentially better if they can harness that.
And I wonder what kinds of challenges have the pandemic and like the year-long delay that came with that after the games were postponed, what kind of challenges has that presented for the swim team?
When things shut down at the start of the pandemic, pools shut down. Some athletes can train outside, or they can find ways to train. For the swimmers, it's a lot harder. So early on in the pandemic, for example, Kylie Moss, our medal hope in the backstroke, she was, training just in parks and trying to mimic some of the exercises that would mimic swimming, and do some of the exercises that would mimic swimming. And
what does that look like?
Well, it's a lot of doing the same movements, but with weights and also, of course, a lot of cardio. But what they were trying to do was keep their muscles in shape for swimming is so much about pulling the water past you. If you can imagine grabbing water and pulling it past you. And so you can duplicate that with weights. Some swimmers, for example, Taylor Ruck, who when the pandemic started was down in the US, she ended up training in backyard pools. So we had Olympians doing it that way, doing whatever they could to train and working out in their apartments and things like that. Of any country, Canada might have been affected the most in terms of time away from the pool because everything was shut down. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much of it they were able to get back over the past several months, really.
Yeah. Well, you wrote about how data has become a major focus for the team and that data actually helped the team prepare for Tokyo after the games were delayed. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how data was useful in this scenario.
They have gone really deep into data for these Olympics. Now, some of our listeners who are sports fans will say other sports have been doing data for years, and that's true. Baseball and hockey got heavy into data analytics almost 2 decades ago. Mm-hmm. But those are big money sports with a lot of budget for research and development. The Olympic sports don't really have that. So in this case, they've been drilling down into where the athletes are at heading into Tokyo and where they're at in their training since Rio. So a good example of that is after Penny Oleksiak took a year off from swimming in 2018, just to get away from the pool and collect herself. When she got back, they were able to track more closely her progression to see whether she was getting back to her form from Rio, which is the big question. And so there was a race in early 2020, before the shutdown, in Knoxville. And this race was so key on the data front because she beat out the American swimmer who she tied in Rio for the gold medal. So right there, you're watching the race and you say, that's a great thing. She beat the swimmer who she tied in Rio. But the data told a deeper story on that race. When they drilled down into the things they count, like strokes and kicks and breathing and the stroke length and everything turns, and they monitor the breakout, which is when the swimmer is underneath the water, kind of doing that dolphin kick before they come up. All of those things told them that Penny had basically swam a suboptimal race and still won. For example, her stroke rate in Knoxville was 43 to 46 cycles per minute. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, as the analyst pointed out, usually in that event, which was the 100-meter freestyle, you would have a stroke rate of 48 to 52 cycles per minute. So Penny had won the race with fewer stroke cycles, which told them if we could get those up to where they should be, there's that much better of a performance we can possibly get out of Oleksiak. So this was all good news. She had won the race with a suboptimal performance.
Right. And that must have felt good for her, right? Because the story that I've heard is that she felt all this pressure after Rio to stay on top and be on top. And then she suffered some injuries and she wasn't doing super well. So this probably gave her some optimism going into the Olympics.
That's exactly it. I can't imagine what it was like to be Penny Oleksiak coming out of Rio. You're 16 years old. You've just broken many Canadian Olympic records. People are telling you you're one of the best swimmers in the world, if not the best swimmer in certain events. And you have to go back to high school. And you've got the pressures of being a high school student and all the other things that come along with that age, getting your driver's license, figuring out what you're going to do after high school. And you're this top Olympic athlete. And so for her, that race in Knoxville, I had a conversation with her in 2020. And she said that's the one where she really felt like she was back, where in her mind, it told her, hey, I'm still the swimmer I was and I can be faster.
Yeah, there's like room for you to get back to where you were before. So you said that they started getting serious about data post-Rio, that they were doing a little bit of it before that. And didn't data also help Swimming Canada discover Penny Oleksiak's greatness and her potential to be an Olympic athlete? Can you talk a bit about that discovery and how they made it?
So what they saw was Penny at age 15 and 16 was winning races and she looked fast. But there was a race in early 2016, so not long before Rio, earlier that year, where they took the data from that and looked at segments of that race and specifically the last 25 meters. And when they saw the data, they couldn't believe it. They knew she was finishing strong in these races. Penny Oleksiak has a reputation for being a strong finisher in a race. When they started drilling down in the data, they started to compare it to other races and saw she had one of the best last 25 meters in the world. And they couldn't believe it. So basically what that told them is if we can harness the other parts of her races, she was inconsistent on the start. So if we can hone that and make her better at her starts, we're already working with a world-class swimmer at the end. And the data really told them, okay, it's not just what the eyes tell you that, okay, she's winning races and she's fast. She's actually world-class fast in a segment of a race.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they have a mission there with the swimmer.
You also wrote about the mirage of a strong finish, and it's basically this idea that when a swimmer appears to be speeding up towards the end of the race, that's not actually happening according to the data. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, the mirage of the strong finish, to me, is one of the amazing things that the data shows you that the eye can't see. Now, it's interesting, I've watched a lot of swimming on television. I've watched a lot of swimming in person. I was in the stands in Rio when Oleksiak was winning her medals in 2016. And the thing that jumped out at everybody was how strong of a finisher Penny Oleksiak is. It almost looked like as she was going towards the finish line, she was charging ahead of the other swimmers. It's not so much what she was doing at the start of her races there. Wait till the end. That's where she finishes strong. And in talking to the data analysts at Swimming Canada, they say it's a common misconception, but swimmers actually don't speed up. It's almost impossible. You have to be superhuman to almost speed up, in the middle of a lap at the end of your race. Right. What the lead swimmer is actually doing is maintaining speed, and the swimmers behind them are falling away, falling off. But the eye tricks us, given the angle and everything, that it appears like the lead swimmer is speeding up and charging forward. So you get this mirage of the strong finish. But what the data tells you is that the job of the lead swimmer is simply to maintain what they've got. And if you can do that, you can win the race, because inevitably fatigue will set in and other racers will fall off.
Cool.
I love talking about it. Thank you.
That's so fascinating. Just this idea that you can look at data and use math basically to shave milliseconds off of someone's time. How do athletes feel about this approach and about the use of data to help them compete?
It's a great question because, not all swimmers are data heads, like in any sport, there's athletes who really like the numbers and there's others who don't want to hear about it. And so I was asking Taylor Ruck about this and she kind of laughed. It was like I was giving her a math quiz. She said, I'm not a numbers person. She finds the data helpful, but she says, when she gets in the pool, she turns off her brain and just goes. Whereas Penny Oleksiak's a real interesting case. Talking to her about data, she says she focuses more on the mechanics of swimming, but what the coaches use the data with her is as a motivator. And so the coaches use data to show her, okay, you're slightly behind here, or if you could just, get your stroke rate up here or hone this part of your start, you could be that much better. And apparently Penny really responds to that kind of coaching. So, there's a lot of different opinions among the athletes about how much they like or how much data helps them. So what the coaches do is they refine their approach based on that. They use different approaches with the athletes based on how responsive they are to the numbers.
So then what do coaches do if they have an athlete like Taylor Ruck who just wants to go in the water and swim and doesn't really want to hear about the data?
Well, that's a big challenge for the coaches because too much information can be bad for an athlete. The coaches like to call it paralysis by analysis. And they worry about this with all of their swimmers, which is if you bog them down with too many numbers, too much analysis, that it's really going to have a negative impact on their performances. And couple that with, training time is really limited. You want to spend most of your time in the pool, not in front of a computer screen. So Ben Titley, who's Oleksiak's coach and is one of the main coaches in the Canadian program, really one of the architects of its success over the past several years, he has this saying where he says to the analysts, 3 things in 9 minutes. You can give my swimmers 3 main points and do it within 9 minutes so we can get back to training. And that's a really good guide that the analysts like, because it allows them to zero in on just the main points. They can simplify it down. And in doing that, they almost like giving the swimmers just bullet points so they can get back in the pool and work on them right away. And that's how they hope to avoid that paralysis by analysis where you start to overthink everything, which could have a negative impact on your performance.
Okay, so what are your expectations going into this? What swim races are you most excited to watch in Tokyo? Tell me a bit about that.
I think right off the start, swimming is going to be a very fascinating event to watch. It's one of the first events of the Olympics, so it kicks off the whole games. And really, it's one of those events where countries can sort of get their first medals out of the way. There's always a lot of like national hand-wringing, about your first medal for some reason. If Canada goes a long time without getting a medal, we all get nervous and we all start wondering what's wrong. But when you can get a medal out of the way, it's like everybody exhales and relaxes for a bit. And that's real. I mean, the athletes feel it in the village as well. And they talk about when they hear Canada has gotten its first medal in another sport, it relaxes everybody a little bit. And so swimming could be that in these Olympics because one of the first swimming events is the relay. And in that event, we've got Penny Oleksiak, Taylor Ruck, Sydney Pickram, and Kylie Moss. And those are all world-class swimmers in their own right. And so we can put together a pretty great relay team. We won bronze in 2 relay events in Rio. So for me, that's going to be the first one I really watch. The other great event to watch is going to be Kylie Moss in the backstroke because she had the world record in 2017. It's since been broken. And, there's this sort of fire that burns inside of Moss to get that title back. And it's going to be really fascinating to see such a competitive field and Canada having a real contender there.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to watch. You've really set the stakes for me. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thank you so much to Grant Robertson. We also have a team of reporters covering the Olympics on the ground, and you can read their work at theglobeandmail.com. As always, you can reach us at thedecibel@globeandmail.com or tweet me at anima_TK. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll talk to you next week.